Because the two of you are have a lot more experience than I do in the world of intelligence, I want to throw at you something that is to me the biggest lingering question about the Russian affair, so to speak. The question I have for you guys is this: given that we know that the same cell or the same actors that were using the same Bitly link and the same tools and all the forensics indicates this, were going after opponents of Vladimir Putin outside of the United States, within Russia, journalists, NGOs, in Ukraine, in other countries around the world. But in the United States, it wasn't, and this is the point I'm getting at. It wasn't this like surgical, strike on the DNC's emails. It wasn't a surgical strike on John Podesta's Gmail account. These hackers were targeting swaths of people that were influencers in the United States, that were connected to the military or connected to intelligence. And so to me, the idea that you say, well, the intent of the hack was to influence the election, I don't believe we've seen evidence to back that up.
I think there's 4 scenarios, and you can rule out a couple really quick. On the Trump side, what he would tell you is he's just a guy who likes Russian issues and believes very similar to them. On the other end is the Manchurian candidate. He's picked, selected, and is doing the bidding of Putin. And I don't think the links are there to come to that conclusion. In the middle, though, you've got 2 scenarios. One, the useful idiot scenario. He's a guy that the Russians saw picking in an agenda that waffles back and forth and is not, as we've seen now, very much on top of national security issues. So you can just run with him. And so you just promote him, and you tear down other opponents to him. And then there's the compromise scenario. Is he really just compromised and he doesn't have much choice? I think that there's only 2 things that can really flush that out as we move forward. And if an investigation moves forward, there's a special prosecutor. What they ultimately have to determine is, in the useful idiot scenario, he's going to be surrounded by a bunch of advisors that are compromised, influence paid for by the Russian government. And we already are seeing some signals of that. Trump is notorious for bringing people on as allies in business or in government that he doesn't really know very well and jettisoning them just as quickly. So I think it's highly probable that Russia could influence these key political figures around him to come help mold his mind, push him towards Russian positions, whether he knows them or not. The other scenario is compromise. Are the claims of St. Petersburg and financial compromise, are they there? That takes a deep investigation, and we know less about this president's taxes and businesses than any president in the history of mankind. If I had to guess right now, I think it's the useful idiot surrounded by Russian influence agents. There's 3 or 4 people that it appears were being investigated or looked at. They had sway with the president at different times. Trump walked up and cited Sputnik News fake story about a Podesta email in Benghazi and dropped it on the ground.
If the GOP wants to raise that as a talking point against her, it is legitimate. In other words, he's now admitting that they could have done something about Benghazi. This just came out a little while ago.
Who gave that to him? Well, it had to be somebody that was tightly woven into the influence system of Russia. Now, is that Trump doing that himself? Well, you can't say that because we've seen how many conspiracies he falls for on Twitter. So he could equally fall for the influence of a nation state who just strategically puts a few people around him for a few $100,000. I mean, it could be a very cheap effort. So I don't think it's this Manchurian candidate. And in fact, I think what'll disprove the Manchurian candidate scenario is as soon as Trump and this administration, which now has McMaster, Mattis, Kelly, a lot of these people in there, a huge push now from the Republican Congress that's anti-Russian. As soon as they go against Russia, whether it's in Syria or Ukraine or one of these Eastern European countries, when you see the Russians pivot their influence operation against Trump, then you'll know he's not the Manchurian candidate scenario. It's somewhere in between.